David Cay Johnston, Pulitzer Prize winning author. You have your Mark Thompson Show sweatshirt on. Look at you. You're so cute.
Santa's elves brought that. Very nice for the kind of weather where I live in Rochester, New York this time of year.
Is it warm and cozy?
Oh, it is once you put on the Mark Thompson hoodie, yes.
There you go. It looks so good on you. Lovely. Yeah. It looks great. I love it.
And it's well made. Unlike lots of things various people send me that are, fall apart, this is clearly well made.
No, it's got the embroidery. It's not just a screening, right? It's got the embroidered Mark Thompson logo. So you're good to go. Yeah.
Yep, it's embroidered.
Nice. All right. Well, let's jump right into politics because, and maybe you can help me make heads or tails of this, but President Biden is ordering a strike on Iranian-backed groups because there were 3 military members serving in northern Iraq, and they were injured in a drone strike. And so when I see then that there's some type of retaliatory thing by the United States, I always think, are we getting back into some kind of war or conflict? What's happening?
Well, the response is done under what's known as proportionality. So you kill 3 of our soldiers, we don't go bomb your capital city and kill 1 million people.
Right.
We hit some kind of target. And our military is very sophisticated about this. They know places they want to hit, where and when they want to hit them. You may recall, maybe you're not old enough, Kim, but early in the Bill Clinton administration, one of his cabinet members, who had been a member of Congress, was in a military plane that crashed and killed everybody on board. And the Pentagon revealed at that moment in a briefing images of the mountains around this airport in Europe in a war zone. This is during the war in what my best friend calls Bosnia schizophrenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina.
Yeah.
And some of the reporters in the room, the savvy ones, suddenly went, wait a minute, what about these photos? And the Pentagon revealed that they have complete 3D photographic maps of every inch of the planet, or every inch of land on the planet.
Wow.
Unlike, say, World War II, where, we didn't know about islands in the Pacific hardly at all.
Yeah.
And one of my father-in-law's jobs in Navy intelligence was to direct submarines to this or that suspected island so they could photograph it through the periscope, and then he and others would draw up a plan for here's where you're going to land the Marines, where you have the greatest likelihood of success and the smallest likelihood of loss.
Yeah.
But we now have all this stuff thoroughly mapped. And so, we are going to continue to face various groups, people backed by Iran and others who are going to harass us and our military. But responses are going to be proportional. And when people attack us, they're not unsophisticated about this. They know that. They know we're not going to just ignore it. We will find some appropriate way. And sometimes we take our time about it so that, you are lulled into a sense of, oh, well, we got away with that one. Boom.
Mm-hmm.
No, you didn't. So I wouldn't worry about that. I would worry more about what we might continue working to do to have fewer people who believe that we're the great Satan.
I'm struck by, though, that if something happened, although why would Iraqi soldiers be in America? But I'm struck by that if something happened here, that another country was in our space in America and did something, we would consider that an act of war, would we not?
Well, we didn't actually quite consider 9/11 to be an act of war. First of all, Congress last declared war on December 7th, 1941. So Congress has the sole power to declare war. And unfortunately, Congress, under both Democrats and Republicans, has continued approving what are called AUMs, authorized use of military force. And I don't think this is a good way to do things. You're going to say you go to war and you get public support for it, or you don't. But even on an attack here in the U.S., somebody gets in and pulls up to the front of a military base or sees a bunch of soldiers or sailors walking down the street, God forbid, and shoots them. We're going to still treat this on the basis of what I think is well established for hundreds, if not thousands of years of diplomatic and military relationships and proportionality.
Let's talk about the article you wrote in dcreport.org. And this is about the Trump ballot case. And you call on these three little words that you think are important, but that might not ever even come up in the Supreme Court case. Can you tell me about it?
Well, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution proposed in 1866, right after the Civil War ended, and added to the Constitution in 1868, includes a provision to make sure that traitors, people who joined the Confederacy, could not hold elected or appointed positions anywhere in government. That doesn't mean just the federal government, the Union. It also means the state of New York or the state of California. You cannot be the elected dog catcher if you engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. Trump and his lawyers argue that he did no such thing. And they point out that after riling up the crowd, spending days telling people to come to Washington, he did at one point say, "Be peaceful." It's sort of like, here's a tiny footnote, completely in contrast to everything else. And the case in Colorado and the cases in a number of other states are built on Donald Trump committed insurrection. Well, now the Colorado Supreme Court says that's absolutely true. All 7 members of the court say Donald Trump is an insurrectionist. Right. There was a trial in a Colorado district court that found he was an insurrectionist. Here's the problem. That's creating a higher than necessary barrier, because the 14th Amendment says if you give aid or comfort to a rebellion, you are unqualified to hold office. Well, it is indisputable that Donald Trump gave aid and comfort, because for more than 3 hours, he did not call out anyone in law enforcement or the military to protect the seat of our democracy, the Capitol, as crowds are chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," Trump's own vice president, the kill Nancy Pelosi. 150 police officers are injured in this matter. Some of them can't work anymore. They're on disability. And there's been this effort to sell the notion that this was just a tourist visit to the White House, nothing abnormal here, which is utter nonsense. So if you just stick to those 3 words, aid or comfort, not aid and comfort, aid or comfort, then Trump doesn't have any arguable case. If you say insurrection or rebellion, he can argue, no, this wasn't insurrection or rebellion. That's the position taken by Alan Dershowitz, the former Harvard law professor. This was not a rebellion. There have been some other people who said, this only went on for about 5 hours. That's not a rebellion. I'm sorry, there are coups that sometimes overthrow governments in 30 minutes. The amount of time is an irrelevancy. This was an insurrection and a rebellion that was designed to keep Donald Trump in office after he clearly, by a large margin, lost the election. But you don't need to address that. All you need to do is show aid or comfort. And the sworn testimony of his own people in the Trump White House, that he sat in the little eating area off the Oval Office with the TV on and said, "Come in and see this. Oh my, isn't this great? Look at these people fighting for me. This is wonderful what they're doing." That's aid or comfort because he did nothing to stop it for 3 hours. And I think that's a much better argument. I also suspect that the Supreme Court conservative majority really doesn't want to have to deal with this case. Because were they to rule as Donald Trump wants, that anything he does while in office as president is lawful, and Joe Biden tomorrow could say, well, I'm just going to remain as president. Some future president could do that. You would be creating someone who is above the law and who you can do nothing about if there's any misbehavior. That's an absurdity, and the court has already ruled in the Trump subpoena cases, in an opinion by Chief Justice of the United States, John Glover Roberts, that every man's evidence is due to the courts, that no one is outside of the jurisdiction of the courts. and particularly Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito, the two most uh, uh, ethically constricted judges, to be polite, and Neil Gorsuch, all are very much that you have to read what's literally the words in the Constitution and apply them as written. So there's no way Trump wins this case. There's no way the court will ever say you're above the law, but they'd really probably like to avoid having to rule on it.
Is that why they said no, lower courts have to go first? Because I was thinking about this, and we're talking right now about the Colorado Supreme Court case and the 14th Amendment clause, where actually it's I'm sorry, I'm getting my cases confused. It is the
There are
immunity,
two related cases
the
going on
presidential
here.
immunity.
One case,
That's right. But it's the
in one
presidential
case, yeah,
immunity that the Supreme Court said, no, it has to go through the lower courts.
right.
But if they know it's going to end up in front of them eventually, why not just deal with it? Is there some type of legality where it has to go through the lower courts?
No, not at all. Supreme Court can take it directly, and that's why Jack Smith in one of the filings went to them. I think that there's several forces at work here. I mean, we don't know what the justices think. They're not going to tell us
Right.
till we see their opinions. But I think the court would rather stay out of this, number one. Some of the justices want Donald Trump back into the White House. Clarence Thomas, I believe, should recuse, that is, remove himself from the case, because his wife was part of the insurrection.
Yeah.
And there's absolute incontrovertible evidence that she was part of this. And now that doesn't mean, that your spouse, you're responsible for anything your spouse does. But the standard is that a reasonably rational, nonpartisan person would see some favoritism. And I think a reasonably rational, nonpartisan person would see in this Clarence Thomas having an interest here before the court. But I mean, the courts don't, it isn't just the Supreme Court. The courts generally don't want to deal with issues like this. The trial judge in Colorado found everything in favor of the plaintiffs' crew, the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, except removing Trump from the ballot. There are about 20 states where we have such cases. I expect that we'll see them in probably all 50 very soon. And some state officials have given statements that they don't flat out say this, but I think make it clear that they believe they make the official appointed determine who's on the ballot. And how they will decide, that Trump is on the ballot or isn't on the ballot. There are a lot of people who say this is punishment, and I would say that's a nonsense argument. Keeping Trump off the ballot is no different than if my 21-year-old grandson announced, I'm going to run for president. You're not eligible because you're not 35 years old.
Right.
Strict
application of the rules. That's it. Yeah.
There are 3 qualifications in the Constitution itself: 35 years old, 14 years a resident of the country, and a natural born citizen. And then the 14th Amendment adds this provision so that we don't have a traitor get to the White House. And there were a lot of people in the Civil War, who had been high-level officials of the government. They had gone to West Point if they were military officers. There was a federal judge who was impeached and removed, who used his position as a federal judge to wage war on the United States of America. Of course, he can't hold office. And the same thing here applies to Donald Trump. He is unfit under the Constitution to hold office. So I just think we should focus on the easiest case to make. He gave aid or comfort to insurrectionists.
So I'm struck by how simple that is. It's a rule or it isn't. And here it is. And it's fascinating to me that in the case of, the original Constitution, how the founders seem to have thought of everything, and those things that weren't thought of with situations like, as you say, the wars, we've come up with these amendments along the way, and we've managed to have this document that will allow us right now to save ourselves. But not everyone agrees, even Democrats. And today we saw from Governor Gavin Newsom here in California, he said he doesn't want the the Trump California to be taken off of our ballot here in California, he says we don't need that because the voters will come up and save the country from him here in California, that it's not necessary. He says he doesn't want our Secretary of State or our California State Attorney General getting involved. Governor Newsom saying in a statement, in California, we defeat candidates at the polls. Everything else is a political distraction. And he's not the only one, because
No, he's
I've
not.
heard people say this, but I don't understand why, if the Constitution, which I have my little pocket Constitution I carry with me everywhere, if the Constitution of the United States has given us the tools to protect ourselves, why we wouldn't use it.
Well, much as I think Trump is not qualified and shouldn't appear on the ballot because he doesn't meet the qualifications, I understand and appreciate this argument, because let's imagine that Trump is denied the ballot, and not denied it through a Supreme Court decision, but denied it in some key states by state officials who, after all, the Constitution says each state is in charge of its elections unless Congress passes a law to the contrary, like the Voting Rights Act, which has been largely gutted. Trump and the people who believe in him will forever argue that, he would have been president but for this chicanery, this treasonous conduct. That's not good for the country. So, I can appreciate that argument. The problem is Trump only has to win 6 or 7 states in the middle of the country, and Florida. In Florida, they purge voter rolls, and they do it in a very ham-handed way. If your name on the voter roll is David Johnston, and there are tons of David Johnstons out there, and one of them is a convicted felon, they strike everybody from the ballot who comes from the neighborhoods they don't like. And the most recent Florida case, almost 1 million names were struck from the voter rolls in 2023, the current year, 90% of whom turn out to be Democrats. Or, as I tweeted, you have to marvel at how even-handed the Republican officials are in running Florida state government. So election manipulation, denying people access to the polls. And if we don't succeed in blocking interference from the Iranians, the North Koreans, the Russians, and the Chinese, who all want Trump in office for very different reasons, by the way, for totally contradictory reasons, he could get back into the White House. And on his theory that as president he can do anything he wants, he can do what he says. He says, I'm going to be dictator on day one. Oh, just for the one day. Right. The world is full of dictators who give up their dictatorships. The people in the Project 2025 are developing plans. Here is how to round up millions of people and hold them in what amount to concentration camps. Here is how to pass new laws so that journalists can't write anything Donald Trump doesn't want. And he said repeatedly, and there's video of him saying, you shouldn't be allowed to write stories about me that I don't approve. Well, in Stalinist Russia, in China, that's how it works. That's how it works in Iran. It's not how it works here.
No.
And
yet.
So this is a terrible problem Trump was put on us. But he could lose the popular vote by 10 million votes or more and still get back to the White House, depending on which states, because of the Electoral College.
And that's true, but which is kind of only bolsters my point that why wouldn't we then, in as many states as possible, use the Constitution to protect America from this danger to our democracy?
Well, that's why I think that's what we should do. I think what we should do is we don't get to pick and choose in the Constitution.
Right.
And the federal government comes along and says, I want to bivouac troops in your home. And it's not a time of war and Congress hasn't authorized it. No, the Third Amendment says you can't do that. So we need to respect the requirements of the Constitution. But as a political argument, not a legal argument, I understand why politicians like Gavin Newsom can say this. And of course, there's no question California will overwhelmingly vote against Donald Trump. I'm not so sure about places like Iowa. I've been watching video interviews by journalists of people, and many of them they don't know what they're talking about. I don't know how else to put it. There's an iHeartRadio talk show host who just recently said, one of the great things about America is our architecture. I mean, great things we built, like the Statue of Liberty.
What?
No, it's a gift from France.
Yeah.
How did you not know that? The people
That's
who
sad.
make all
Is there
sorts of assertions that websites like Raw Story make fun of because they are so ridiculously badly informed.
yeah.
But there's lots of people like this in this country, lots of
It's
them.
true. One of the people that is not like this is Karen Cooper, who writes in, just got David's book at the Mark Thompson show, The Making of Donald Trump for Christmas. She says, as I read it, I can hear David Cay Johnston's voice narrating in my head. That's awesome. I love that,
Thank you,
Karen.
Karen. Thank you very much.
Very cool. Yeah, I can imagine reading anything you write now. I would just be able to hear you talking to me. Let's talk about this other article I found on DC Report, which is state election units. Can you explain what those are and why this is interesting?
I really can't. I'm
Okay.
sorry about that, but that's not something that I
Not
know
interested?
enough about to feel comfortable talking about.
Yeah, okay. No, this is I guess uh the Washington Post was looking at these 6 Republican states that were bent on finding widespread voter fraud,
Right.
And so they established these. The election integrity units were established or expanded in 6 states. They only got 47 convictions during this period, they say, in which tens of millions of votes were cast. I found it to be an interesting article. It's on DC Report, so if anyone's interested, go check that out. But let's move.
Fundamentally, these are voter suppression efforts.
Yeah.
And many of the cases where double voting was found were Trump people doing this. But the what's clear, I can't say this, that what's very clear from all the litigation and all of the efforts to find voter fraud is there is no significant voter fraud in this country. There's no voter fraud that rises to a level in a presidential election that would overturn the results. And here's an important thought to keep in mind. Every single Republican who is saying that the 2020 election was stolen, despite zero evidence, numerous cases brought, nobody can find any evidence. Every single one of those people won themselves in the same race by the same voters at the same ballot machines or paper ballots as the race they contend was stolen. So here's an utterly incoherent argument. And it goes to one of the principles I try to teach my students, my law students and journalism students when I talk to them. And that is, step back for a moment always and think, what is going on here? Because often the very most important things are hiding in plain sight right in front of you. And I urge them all to read a short story by Edgar Allan Poe called The Purloined Letter, because it's the classic of the obvious is right in front of you and you're diligently searching and you can't find it because you think it's hidden when it's right there, right in front of you.
Well, here's something that's right in front of us, and I mention it because it's the picture of the show today, and it was yesterday on Christmas Day, a day when, your goodwill toward peace in your heart and goodwill toward man and whatever, and we're supposed to set everything aside and be peaceful and kind to each other. Donald Trump takes to social media, and he's saying to his enemies, may they rot in hell, Merry Christmas. He's angry. He goes on this Christmas Day tirade. He doesn't stop with the angry, black-hearted nastiness, even on Christmas Day. That is something that is not hiding. It's right in front of us. This is who this person is.
Yeah, Donald's character is right out there. And he's unusual in the fact that he tells you these sorts of things. He doesn't hide them. And a lot of people go, well, how could it be a crime? I mean, he's telling you what he's doing. Well, I could say to you, let's go rob a bank, Kim. And we get in the car and head to the bank with guns in our pockets. That doesn't mean we didn't go to try to rob the bank. So Donald has no regard for anyone but himself. And regard is a couple of words in our society we need to use a lot more. Prudence. We need people to be prudent. Regard, a synonym for caring. We are, after all, a society of 330 some million people. We are not, as Margaret Thatcher and Milton Friedman said, X and a million people sharing the same geography. And Donald has no regard for any of that. Everything is about Donald. And I would tell you that Donald is a megalomaniac. I used to say that about him, but he got to be president of the United States, so it's a little hard to claim that he has delusions of grandeur given where he got.
Yeah.
But these are just sort of core problems. We are not doing a good job in this country of passing on to younger generations basic political and cultural information. If there are social studies teachers, I apologize. I know I'm going to upset some of you, but we aren't teaching American government the way they did when I went to school in the 60s in Santa Cruz. You had to pass a test. You had to at least do the textbook version of checks and balances.
We went to the same high school. So did I.
Yeah. But
I remember it well. You had to take U.S. government. You had to pass it as a senior.
I will tell you that some of my children who went to California schools, that's not the case. And I've talked to many young people who don't have this basic understanding. I've had the repeated experience lecturing in high schools. I go to any inner city high school that invites me, I will go to it if I can get to it. I mean, somebody says, come to Texas tomorrow, maybe not, but if it's within driving distance, I go. Yeah. And I'm astonished at the number of students who are overwhelmingly Black and not in great economic circumstances, who don't really know the history of the civil rights movement.
Wow.
And many of whom express, when I ask, well, now, who were the parties in World War II? And, hand goes up. That's when we and the Germans, the Nazis, fought the Russians. Completely, wrong. Absolutely, completely wrong. I love the little memes on the internet that show all the guys going onto the beaches of France where they became hamburger, and just huge numbers of them were killed before they even got out of the waves. That say, this is Antifa 1944. This is fighting fascism 1944. So we're not doing a good job, and this is a very widespread problem. In 1997, we had the 50th anniversary of British walking out of India. And I went to the dinner here in Rochester. We have a very large segment of the Indian diaspora. And I was late. So instead of sitting with a bunch of muckety-mucks because of my wife, I ended up at the kids' table. Me and 9 20-somethings, American-born, all the children of doctors, chemists, professors, highly educated.
Sure.
And they didn't know the story of how Gandhi got the British to leave. None of them could explain what happened at Amritsar, which is where General Dyer brought up a machine gun and killed 1,000 women, children, and babies, simply because they were gathering. They were all fleeing, and he kept shooting them. They didn't know about the Salt March and why the Salt March and what was the significance of the Salt March, because it was entirely symbolic. And I was dumbfounded. I was talking not long ago, a couple of years ago now, with a friend of mine who's a retired police sergeant in Rochester. And I said, when I went into the homes of poor Black families in East Palo Alto in the late 60s, there would be a picture on the wall of Martin Luther King, and if they were Catholic, of the Pope, and often President Kennedy. And sometimes it was literally torn out of a newspaper or a magazine and put up a little piece of tape or a pin. And I said, the last times I have been in the homes of poor Black families here in New York City and Philadelphia and Atlantic City, I don't see any of those. And my friend Marv said, no, you don't. You don't see them anymore. We are not. That's where I got the idea. He said, we are not transmitting the cultural knowledge we need to young people the way we did. Now, that doesn't mean things were better in the good old days, because they weren't. But we do need to pay attention if young people are not learning the actual history of our country, don't understand the nature of fundamental movements, the feminist movement, the civil rights movement, etc. Or you can have people like Donald Trump come along and manipulate people. And we need to be very, very concerned about this. And, when we have schools where teachers are intimidated about what they teach. Yep. You can go on the internet and get a list of, I think it's Orange County, but one of the counties in Florida, the 654 books that has been removed from the library.
Yeah.
And you look at a couple of books and go, okay, maybe I can see somebody being upset about this, but for 650 of the 654,
No.
it's like, what are you talking about? These are the great works of literature. And by the way, if you're going to be upset about things that mention homosexuality or other things that trouble you, then you better ban the Bible.
Right.
Boy, you better just start right there, right down to the formula given in the Old Testament for the mix of herbs that may induce an abortion.
Yep.
So we will always have an anti-intellectual movement in the country. We will always have people who favor authoritarian government, but we need to use education to minimize the number of those people. And we're going to find out in less than a year, do we still have our civil rights? They're guaranteed until January 20th of 2025. And after that, whether we're a free people.
Is that true? Now talk about me being uneducated. I thought that was just a given. Once you have those rights, that can't be taken away.
Oh, no. Donald Trump, if he can do anything he wants as president and gets back to the White House, he will do that this time. The first time around, he was incompetent at it. This time around, there are people lined up who agree with him, who they're already vetting people. They're establishing lists of all the civil servants they're going to fire. They're developing a plan for rounding up millions of people and putting them into concentration camps. These are people who are in the country without permission. And often you have families, where dad is illegally here, but mom is an American citizen or mom has a green card. Right. And the kids were born here. They want to eliminate birthright citizenship. Mm. If you're born here, you're an American citizen. I mean, they've made very clear what their plans are. Trump says he's going to use the Justice Department to prosecute his enemies. And once you go down that road, people who studied authoritarianism, Professor Timothy Snyder with a Y, Timothy Snyder at Yale, who's written eloquently and simply about this. Sarah Kendzior, former journalist who got a PhD in essentially authoritarian studies, who lives in St. Louis, and others who've written about this. The patterns of authoritarian rule are well known and well understood.
Yeah.
They've been thoroughly researched, and down this road lead firing squads. That's what happens in the end. If you want to understand this and get a little humor out of it, see the film, came out about 3 years ago, The Death of Stalin. It's black comedy, but it's very serious about the moment Stalin died, what Khrushchev and General Zhukov, even the great hero of World War II for the Russians, and others realized was going to happen unless they acted. And it's done as black comedy. Steve Buscemi plays Khrushchev, is just brilliant. But it will show you the process. And just one more little thing, I was on the radio once back around 2016, 17, and my two youngest daughters, who were grown-ups, were in the living room, and they heard me respond to a question, and they were sort of to each other. When I got off the radio, I said, "I'm sorry, what was that about?" And they said, "Did you get asked, Dad, if you get shot if Trump starts a revolution against the Constitution?" And I said, "Yeah, in the second round." And they both erupted in laughter. And I said, "What's so funny?" And they say, Dad, you always say having 8 kids shows you're an incurable optimist. You think the second round?" So, but seriously, that's where we will go. It'll be the end of freedom in America. Yeah. We will live in a fascist state. We will have a crazy person with no historical concepts in the White House. And he will have a Supreme Court majority that either will be totally unprincipled or will be ineffective in blocking him, because the Supreme Court can just issue orders. It can't enforce them.
Well, you're painting a great picture of what's ahead in 2024. Can't wait for the new year, David Cay Johnston. Suddenly, I'm not quite filled with the optimism I had coming into the conversation.
Yes, well, hopefully a year from now, we'll be celebrating that the American people saved their democracy. But, you don't know what's going to happen in the future until it happens.
It's never been more important. And so what can people do? I mean, in the past, I've joined groups of people writing postcards to swing states. There, there you can go to a phone bank and start making phone calls,
Yeah.
but nobody wants to talk to you.
If
Usually, what do you do? I mean,
well, if
how do you take it? How do you look at what you just said and
if you can, I'm sorry.
no, and feel it, like feel that there's danger ahead and that you want to help make it so that Trump doesn't get back in there and that America's safe. What are I mean, sometimes it feels like there's nothing you can do and you're hopeless.
I think there's a lot of things you can do. First of all, if you're in a state that's going to definitely vote Trump down, California, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and you can afford to do it, arrange, hook up with people like the indivisible groups. There are hundreds of them across the country, to go to a place where the vote results may go either way, particularly where they may go either way in a congressional district as well as the state vote that will result in an electoral college decision. And offer to go there several days before the election. You have to go with two of you, but you can drive people to the polls who may have difficulty getting to the polls. You can volunteer if you can't afford to go to a place for phone banks. People, nothing sells like word of mouth. People will tell you, and whether they're selling books or movies or records, word of mouth, and then a personal touch. There are a number of people who got elected in congressional districts. Nobody thought somebody with their views could be elected because they spent 2 or 3 years knocking on as many doors as they could. Every minute they weren't working, they were out banging on doors and talking to people. So I think there's a lot that we can do. And we need to make sure that there are plenty of lawyers working on election day over people who want to file a provisional ballot. We don't want a repeat of things like Dodge City, Kansas, where in the Old West, there was a big signs on the edge of town everywhere. You had to go to the sheriff and turn in your guns. You weren't allowed to carry them. And they moved the one polling place in town outside the town and a mile's walk beyond the bus route, which was clearly designed to make sure Hispanics who were American citizens couldn't vote. I think there's a lot of things that people can do to organize. It is remarkable that the Democrats, who historically were the party of unions and working people, have lost a lot of organizing skills, and the Republicans have picked a lot of them up.
Yeah.
And so the Democrats really need to work on learning organizing skills. They need to pay attention to places like there's a nonprofit in Boston called the Right Question Project. If you type that into a Google or a Bing internet search, you'll turn it up right away, the Right Question. And they teach people how to frame questions to government officials and how to talk to people. People need to not be quiet about this. They need to step forward. And we also need to counter this narrative that the economy is the worst economy in 50 years that I just heard from somebody on the right 2 days before Christmas. Worst economy in 50. What are you talking about? The stock market is at record highs. Trump said there would be a collapse, and now he says, well, there will be eventually. Well, yeah, markets go up and down, but the fact is we have a record high. We have the lowest unemployment in about 50 years, and it's continued now for almost 2 years under Biden. The inflation rate for the last 6 months is 2%. Now, people say, wait a minute, I'm still paying more than I think I should have to pay for eggs. Yeah, there was an increase in prices, but it's the rate of increase since then has tailored back down to the Fed's preferred measure of 2%. You want to have a little bit of inflation so that there's price movement. We need to talk about the fact that corporate profits, which are all reported by the companies, they're up 75 times as much as wages are. I think that's the right number. I apologize if I used the wrong metric there, but I think that's the rate is 75 times increased wages. Real wages are rising, particularly for people in the bottom half of the labor market. And so actually we have a terrific economy overall, and yet lots of people are, oh, this is absolutely terrible, because that's what the mendacious, lying news organizations they're listening to are telling them. And let me leave you with one little funny thing I just put on my Twitter and threads today, and that is Fox has been nominated for a new award,
What
the
is
George
this?
Santos Integrity in Journalism Award.
Oh, no. That's not journalism. No, I'm sorry. Who nominated for that award?
Oh,
No
it's just
one.
a made-up meme.
Yeah,
That
it's
Fox has
ridiculous.
been,
Yeah.
nominated for the George
Yes.
Santos Honesty and
George
Integrity in
Santos Award.
Journalism Award.
I missed that for the George Santos part.
Yeah.
David Cay Johnston, I could talk to you all day. Thank you for staying a little late to tell us about it. I'm gonna ding you for, I think it was mendacious. So that was a
Yes,
great word you
a good
brought
word
out.
people need to use more often.
Yes, it is. Happy New Year to you. We'll see you in 2024. Thank you for being here.
All right, take care.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.